Hey everybody, for this video we're going to be talking about wood. So the first thing I want to establish is the difference between a softwood and a hardwood. Softwoods and hardwoods don't necessarily mean how dense or how thick or how hard they are. Softwoods and hardwoods are a classification of trees depending on how they make seeds. So softwoods are coniferous trees, meaning they have cones and they have needles, right? So they don't have leaves, they've got needles, they've got sprigs, they've got cones, and typically, because of this, their cell structure is more open, so they are softer, they're less dense. This is not really true. It's mostly true. There are some softwoods that are harder than hardwoods. So a hardwood, if a softwood is a coniferous tree, a hardwood is a deciduous tree, meaning that it has leaves, and more specifically, its seed is a nut, right? So acorns, oak, things of that nature that have nuts. So softwood is deciduous, hardwood is coniferous, right? So that's really the main split in the middle. Typically, for the most part, softwoods are softer, they grow faster, they're not as old of trees, and hardwoods grow slower, so they're more compact, they are a harder wood, but it's not necessarily one-to-one accurate. It's all based off of the types of seeds. Now that being said, most of the woods that we're going to deal with in the shop are softwoods. And for the most part, we deal with pine. There's two main types that we'll deal with here in the South. You either deal with a Douglas fir, or sometimes it'll be spruce slash fir, right? They're kind of similar trees. Those are more common, your Christmas trees. Or they will be a number 2 yellow pine, which is a southern thing that it only grows in the South. So the number 2 yellow pine is a whole lot thicker, a whole lot denser and heavier, and it is harder than some of your softer hardwoods. The only hardwoods that we'll really deal with is birch is the cheapest and the worst of the hardwoods. We don't really use anything else in theater because it just gets too expensive. So first, let's talk about some of our stick goods. First, let's lead off with the 2x4. So this is a 2x4. It is called a stick good because it is just a stick of wood, right? So you can see, get this zoomed in and focus just right. Let me see if the other side's better. You can see the grain, right? So you can see the center of the tree was right around here. You can see those rings, right? That's what you get when you do a cross section of a tree. When you cut a tree down, you see the rings of that tree. So this particular piece came from the center of some big, tall pine tree. They call it a 2x4 because when it goes through the milling process, it starts off as 2 inches by 4 inches. When you purchase it, they are no longer 2 inches by 4 inches. This dimension is 1.5 inches. This dimension is 3.5 inches. So what they call that is the difference between a nominal and dimensional. Its nominal, meaning its name, is 2x4. Its actual dimensional dimensions, its dimensional, yes, its dimensions is 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. 2x4 is a fantastic building material. Most of your houses are built out of 2x4s. They have a great compression strength, meaning, try to show this, in this direction, they are really strong. This is okay, this is even better. They hold lots of weight. This is what we use to build platforms. Most of our platforms that we build, or the style that we build, hold up to 150 pounds per square foot. A single platform can easily hold a cast of 5 or 6 people, right? It's very strong, relatively inexpensive. These are approximately $1 a foot, right? So an 8-foot, no, not even, 50 cents a foot. An 8-foot 2x4 costs you typically around $4. The longest you can get a 2x4 in is 16 feet. Any longer, that just doesn't exist. That's kind of the cap of kind of your wood stick goods is 16 feet. All right, 2x4. Back to 2x4. So 2x refers to this thickness, right? So you can also get a 2x6, 2x8, 2x10, 2x12, and of that, the 2x, that 1.5 inches stays the same, and it gets wider. So its thickness stays the same, but its width changes. So a 2x4 is 1.5 inches by 3.5. A 2x6 would be 1.5 inches by 5.5. A 2x8, 1.5 inches by 7.5. And then at 2 by 10, it actually gets a little bit weirder and smaller. It's 1.5 by 9.25, and then it continues that pattern up to 2 by 12. They don't really make anything thicker than a 2 by 12. 2 by 14s don't really exist. So then we move to a 1 by. Same product, it's just been cut smaller. So this is a 1 by 4. It's been cut at an angle. This is from Hairspray. Similar logic, but different math. So a 1 by 4 is 3/4 of an inch this direction by 3.5. Right, so the 4 matches with the 2 by 4, but the 1 by is half of a 2 by. So it's 3/4 of an inch by 3.5. And the same math works or follows suit with the 2 by 4s for a 1 by 4, 1 by 6, 1 by 8, 1 by 10, 1 by 12. They come max 16 feet. 1 bys are a little bit cheaper than 2 by 4s, but not half the price. Also, 1 bys are typically a little harder to get to be straight. So you can buy them in different grades. Typically, A is the better and goes down from there. So an A grade is better than B, B is better than C, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can see the grains a lot better in this piece of 1 by. So you can see those grains from the tree. And if you ever really want to get into it, you can look at the grains in your board, determine whether or not your board is going to warp or how it is going to warp. And you can look that up on your own end if you really are curious about carpentry. All right, so those are our main 2 stick goods. They get a little bit specific if you need to. If you get into hardwoods or really nice woods, they put them all in quarters. So you don't buy a 2 by 4, you'd buy a 5/4, which would be 1.25 inches. You buy a 3/4 or a 2/4. Similar dimensions, similar logic. It's just a little bit more specific because it's nicer wood. All right, so next we're going to move towards our sheet goods. So these being like a big stick. This is just a small example, but this is a sheet. So this is plywood. Plywood typically comes in America in 4 foot by 8 foot measurements. Right, so it's 8 foot wide, 4 foot tall, rectangle. And it's called plywood because it's made out of plies. So you can see the different layers, just like your toilet paper, right? You've got 2-ply toilet paper, it's got 2 layers on it. So this has plies or individual layers. So the way they make plywood is they take a log and they basically put it into a pencil sharpener and they stick a knife in there and then they roll the log onto the knife and it makes a thin layer of wood. And then they take those woods and they alternate the grains. So in your woods, the grain is the strength of your piece of wood. So you can see in this piece of wood that the grain runs in this orientation. You especially see it right here where you've got these lines that run towards the top and bottom. So this piece of wood is stronger in this orientation from long end to long end than it is in this orientation. Right? So the grains add that strength. So in plywood, what they do is they alternate the plies. And that's why you see the difference in colors. Right? So this one is running top to bottom. This next one is running side to side. And so they alternate from top to bottom, side to side, top to bottom, side to side. And that alternation of grains makes a stronger thing. Then they basically glue it and clamp it down and make plywood. Plywood, like the other lumber, is graded by letter. So this is I think this is a sandy ply. So it's a B grade or an A grade plywood that's been sanded to look nicer, and they fill the voids in it so it looks better. The cheapest that you can typically buy is a CDX. C meaning, so one side is a C grade, one side is a D grade, and the X being exterior. So if you buy really cheap plywood at Home Depot, CDX is the crappiest that you can buy. It's pretty cheap. You can buy, the plywoods can get really expensive, up to multiple hundreds of dollars per sheet. The stuff that we buy is an imported birch, and it's an AA. So it's an A on one side, an A on the other side, and they put a very thin birch veneer on the outside of it. We buy it for about $36 a sheet, just frame of reference. What else do I want to say about plywood? Plywood is really strong. It's relatively heavy. Full sheet weighs about 75 pounds, so it's not something that can be thrown around. Plywood is typically used in our industry for standing on top of. It's a little heavy to use as a wall, but it's nice, it's thick. You can put screws, you can put hooks, you can put it in this orientation, you can stand on it. It takes good pressure, it doesn't dent. It's a really good building material. So then we're going to move over to another sheet good that is very different. And this is MDF. Stands for medium density fiberboard. So I'm going to get a zoom in on here. So you can see that there's no grain. So basically what MDF is it's a particular type of tree that they ground up and they add formaldehyde and they add glue. So they make sawdust and they add glue and then they smush it. So they turn a wood into fibers and then smush it together and they make a fiberboard. Medium density, meaning that there is a lighter density and a heavier density. So this is somewhere in the middle. They make it in 1/8 inch increments. So mostly you can get 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch, 1 1/4, 1 1/2. So you can get really thick MDF if you need it. For the most part in this shop, we'll deal with 1/4 inch MDF. A couple things, the reason that we use it is it's cheap. 1/4 inch MDF costs $8, $8.50, I think is the price right now. So you can buy a 4 foot by 8 foot sheet of MDF, 1/4 inch thick for $9. But since it doesn't have a grain, you never have to overcome the grain. Also, one thing that's hard to show on video is that it's very smooth, right? There's no texture on the top of it. So you can paint this to make it look like whatever you want. You can get a glossy surface, you can paint it to look like marble. It takes paint like a dream. It also cuts very easily since it doesn't have a grain. For those reasons, I like to use it. It is rather heavy. So whereas a 3/4 inch sheet of MDF weighs 75 pounds, 3/4 inch plywood weighs 75 pounds, 3/4 inch MDF weighs about 100 pounds, right? So this is heavier than plywood, which is its biggest trade-off, is it's rather heavy. But it's nice to work with. It's easy to machine, it's easy to use, it's easy to paint. It's just a little heavy. So that's MDF. All right, the last one that I wanted to talk about is Luan. Make sure I get this in the picture. So this is Luan, spelled L-A-U-A-N. Luan is technically a type of tree, and they used to make Luan out of Luan trees. It's a little bit less, and a Luan tree is very porous. It's not dense. So Luan weighs about half as much as MDF does. So a 1/4 inch sheet of MDF weighs about 25 pounds. This weighs about 12, 15 pounds. Right? So Luan is very light. But because of that, it is not very weight bearing. Right? So Luan is almost solely used for flats. Right? It makes a great wall covering because it's hard. You can knock on it. It exists. You can put staples into it. You can put screws into it, but it does not hold weight. But since it's light, since it still is a durable material, when you're making things that are going to fly, when you're making things that aren't weight-bearing, Luan is perfect. If you're going to purchase this at a Home Depot or a Lowe's, they typically don't actually call it Luan. They sell it as underlayment. This is basically what they put on top of the concrete underneath your carpet. So this is the barrier in between the carpet and the concrete, with a carpet pad on top of this. That's how they sell it at your Home Depot, your Lowe's. If you're talking to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, they'll call it Luan. Previously to 15 years ago, this used to have a mahogany veneer on the outside of it. So back in the days when we were really pillaging the Brazilian rainforest, they would cut down mahogany trees and they'd cut a really thin veneer and they would put it on Luan. Which is a shame because it's still garbage wood, but it looked really pretty. So sometimes you'll still find places that dye the wood pink because it's what people are used to. What they're used to seeing is kind of this reddish tone to Luan. It's all the same. It's kind of a garbage piece of wood. Inside of it, it's got strings and fillers. But again, $9 for a full sheet, really light, easy to cut, not hard. It does have some grain, as you can see to it. So when you're painting it, you do have to overcome the grain, meaning typically you have to paint it multiple times, right? So you've got to paint it, sand it, paint it, and then do the final painting that you want it to if you want to overcome the look of the grain. Again, all of these sheet goods in America come 4 foot by 8 foot, so you can't see the top of it. And I am 5'8" tall, 5'9", so I can't even reach the top because it's 8 foot by 4 foot wide. And all these sheet goods come 4 foot by 8 foot. Sizes vary in different countries, especially if you go outside of the standard measurement system and you go into metric. All right, so that's most of our common materials for wood. See you on the next one.